not only learn how to be on camera, they all are learning how to shoot, edit, produce, put together a proposal for an online program. It's going to be different, I think. We've had a number of surveys done on what's going to happen to television. And it hasn't happened yet, but we've been told that within 10 years there'll only be one television newscast in the Bay Area. That the other stations will get out of it. They'll move on, and there'll be one station that'll remain doing news. Because they can get news. Because people can get news.
Well, here, this is the source. Can you imagine, back in 1963, 66, that people would be watching this? Your show, Velvet, would be on the phone.
No, I cannot imagine that. I mean, you're talking to a person who, the reason I had so many interns is because I refused to learn what I needed to know to stay in the business for a long time. And I figured out early on, if I get a really good tech kid, you know, I can keep on just being me and the kid can learn things. I mean, the fundamentals of it is what they learned from you as an experienced person. Getting it into the machine and knowing how it operates and so on are things they've sort of started anyway in college. And so we had happy relationships. I have so many kids that I'm still talking to when they get a new job or something good happens in their life. You know, I get a letter or a phone call. So I think the person one-to-one effort that you put into conveying to them your joy at the job when it's done, pleasure at the end of a story, get a lead and get a chance to follow up on it and make it into something. So when they're talking about they want to do things on their own, it's the way we used to suggest a story or a series, and then we could get permission and go out and do it. And that's what I think but they don't want to carry the camera and do a 1.5 minute story at the end of the day. That is not why you can keep them interested.
I just want to say, and think what Manny said. I was thinking about this because it said television past, present, future. Here's what I tell the interns. I say, create your own brand. Go back to the days of vaudeville. With vaudeville, you know, there were 30 different acts. But everybody had their own name, they had their own brand, and that's how they sold themselves. I think that's the future for a lot of people. Be able to do this on multiple platforms, not just TV and radio, but online and all the other various things that are going to be out there with your own brand. Yeah, there will still be some regular jobs in broadcasting and stuff like that, but the vast majority won't do that. And then remember, as you do this, what worked and what failed, so that you will know how to apply it the next time. Always accept and understand the power of your own personality. And then finally, the power of the tribe, and that is those various audiences that you will be talking with or to or at and all of that stuff. I tell them that, and I say, if you do that, then there are more platforms, there are more venues for employment, there's more chance to make more goddamn money than you can imagine, because you are going to be on a multiplicity of platforms. And then what you don't have to worry about is the politics of the newsroom, and you don't have to worry about, you know, this person liking you or not. What you are is your own creature, and that is going to be the way to survive in the future.
Let me chime in, because we all saw a future on this program. I ran into a woman who's the director of the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship Program at Stanford that's been around 50 years. I was lucky enough to be one of the fellows in 85, 86 and to spend a year at Stanford. And I've served on the board ever since. And we changed the program from being a mid-career kind of perspective journalist kind of thing where you could go to Stanford. They would pay you for a year to take other courses to broaden your horizons. It kept me in the business, I can tell you. If I hadn't had the fellowship, I'm not sure I would have made it the 45 years or so that I stayed in the business. But we changed it about 10 years ago into a new program, which is sort of an entrepreneurial journalism fellowship program, because we saw the handwriting on the wall that the business was changing. It was mostly print oriented. Most of the print folks were being laid off. So I met a young lady yesterday who just finished her fellowship year and is hired by the Wall Street Journal, is starting next week. And the director, who is on boards all around the country and keeps her finger on journalism, I said, what is the future? I'm going to talk tomorrow. Is it pessimistic or what? And she said, and I'm quoting her now, that the Donald, the president, has done more for journalism than anyone else has in the 18 years since she saw the first recession and downturn in journalism 18 years ago. That because of that, the subscriptions, donations to things like ProPublica and online investigative journalism is higher than it has ever been. And subscriptions and donations and all to things like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the big national papers is higher than it has been. I think the Chronicle, of course there have been other changes there, but it's higher. She said where she sees the real problem is local news coverage. And if any of you are familiar with Half Moon Bay, they just lost their little local paper. But citizens got together and purposely, without having a bent, you know, I'm the Republican in town or the Democrat or I want to sway this way, they got a non-biased group to buy the paper, keep the same editor, and to continue with local journalism because they have seen how important it is. And they're hoping that that, and there are a few other models, she told me, around the country where they're trying to replicate that, and that that is the future for print local newspapers. And you would think that that is a great end for television or wherever you're going to do it, whether it's on turning on at 6 o'clock or whatever. But if you're going to do online local journalism, people are hungry for it. But it has to be on their terms when they want it. And they've got to believe that it's unbiased. And that is, to me, one of the biggest problems today with networks being rated this way or that way, and then they think local is tainted even though it isn't. And, you know, I think that's a real problem for television.
Community newscasts could be the future, part of the future.
They're already doing that with the fellowship program.
I know we're sort of getting tight on time, but a lot of people here had their basis in radio, so we all go back to a long time ago. Can we go back in each of your histories, and can you tell us maybe the one memorable story that stands out in your career, the one that maybe made a difference, or the one that had the most emotional impact on you? Okay, how about
I will tell you one thing about radio. The thing I always tell people, I was really lucky that I started in television in 1974 in Sacramento. And what was happening is, as I got there, all the guys who had started television, in 48, 49, were just getting ready to retire. And so they told me the greatest stories about what it was like to come out of radio. First of all, to be talked out of leaving radio to go into television. Because they were, you know, these guys were saying, I wasn't going to go to this new place. I was at KFRC or KSFO, and I was having, you know, I was an engineer. I was doing great.
Yeah.
They were doing great. And then they told me these great stories about how they started television. I mean, at local TV. And I remember this one story this guy told me. He said, we went out, we were trying to sell ads. We went to a bowling alley and said, you know, buy an ad on our station. It was Channel 13 at the time. I said, and everybody will love it. And the guy said, I'm not sure I'm going to want it. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll bring the station to your bowling alley, and we'll broadcast all day for your bowling alley. And the guy said, all right, do it. And so as soon as the station went off the air at midnight, they loaded up the station into trucks. And they drove it to this, the guy says, we drove to the bowling alley. We used telephone lines to set everything up. We started broadcasting at 7 in the morning. Of course, there was nobody at the bowling alley, so they had to have their wives and kids, the whole station. They got all their families to put them into the bowling alley, and they started broadcasting from this bowling alley. People, you know, the kids were half asleep, and, you know, bowling, and the wives were filled up with mimosas. They were giving them champagne, and that's how they broadcast. They started stuff like that, and I always think that was one of the great gifts I got, was talking to these guys, telling us this is how we started it, and we tried anything.
Yeah.
We would try anything to do it, and it was just amazing. And they were all ex-radio guys. You know, the guys who had the voices, the salespeople, the engineers, they were all radio guys, and They started this new medium and they just went to it.
Difficult to avoid the balls, though, as they were exactly right. Yes, I mean, you, of course, I mean, there's legislation that
Oh, yeah, no.
you're responsible for.
Yeah, we've done a lot of laws passed over the years. I'll just tell you about radio, because I very much involved in radio. I was at KGL. I did a weekend show called Consumer Talk for 5 years, and then for almost the same period of time, KGO had an FM station down on Polk Street called KGO FM, which later became something else, but I did that every night for 5 nights a week for many, many years. And then when I went to Southern California, I got to work with an enormously successful radio station in the same building, KNX Radio. It was KNX TV, which turned into KCBS, but KNX Radio. And I worked there for 10 years, even remotely, for 5 years after I left LA. And did a little bit of radio when I first came back, but I personally think that that's one of the hardest things you can do, because you have to be much more concise than even TV reporters. And to do talk shows, that's the smartest broadcasting there is of all, because that is where if all you got is bullshit, then you're not going to last. Now, I'm not saying bullshit's bad, but that audience is way smarter than you are, I promise you. So that was kind of interesting. The only other thing I want to say about all of that is probably the most interesting person I ever met in all the years that I did this, and I met a ton, is Al Shepard, an honest-to-God, down-to-earth human being who complained about all the things you hear guys complain about. And was just a very nice guy. I got to know him actually reasonably well, and I was very impressed with him because he was a childhood hero of mine. So that was fun. But yeah, over 40 years you can do a lot of things.
Let's see, an unusual way to get into radio. I was interested in radio because of the Republican convention I'd been at. Everybody sort of knows that story from '64. But a little station I went to work for, it became KSAN, a powerhouse, but at that time it was a black program station. And the guy working there wanted to have what a news department. So I was his volunteer. And the way we did the news is we knew this drop-off time for every one of the 4 newspapers published in San Francisco. My job was to be on Market Street, pick up each copy of the paper, run down, pick up a couple. I'd stay waiting on the next 2. We'd go upstairs. We had no time to rewrite. We'd just clip it, staple it to a page. And then he would decide, because he was a senior, who would read what story. Now, that is not the way to get into radio, but it worked. We never gave anybody credit for anything. We just read the parts of the stories that we liked, and nobody was going to come after that little station. But it gave me a chance to develop my voice and to sort of learn what news attracts people by the phone calls and reaction we get from people. So that was how I got into radio. But, they're just unusual ways to do anything if you really want to do it. And so that was the way, and it was the voice that got me into TV, because I'd gotten over one of the hurdles.
Well, I may be the only one sitting here who never worked in radio. The closest I got to it was sharing an office for 20 years with Bob Melrose. So I got to see it kind of up close and personal. And Bob would always do a story. I was amazed. We'd come right back and he'd be on the air, and I'm still digging. And he would come in the next day and said, I watched what you did last night because you had stuff I didn't have, because I did have that luxury of time. So that was my close association with radio. But I think your initial question were things that had impact on you. And there are so many of 45 years or whatever it was of things that impacted you. I was a media witness to the last gas chamber execution in California. That was very difficult with sort of flashbacks and other things. How many people you've seen die in front of you, or a father who's collapsed on you because his son has just died and he's asking for help. There are just so many of those, and they're not always the big stories that you think of. They're the stories of everyday people like us. And I always said that, to me, I try to treat each story as if it were my family or me. and I'm telling their story, and it deserved to be told the best that you ever could. Of one standout was when I very first started in San Antonio in the early 70s on air, and Mother Teresa came to San Antonio, big Catholic community in San Antonio, and back then she didn't have an entourage with her. She was barely known, but Time magazine had just mentioned this little lady who was almost like a living saint. Now think about it, 1972. So she came and I'd read about her and I wanted to go interview her. And I called the church and they said, sure, come over. So the cameraman and I went over there. And it's just us, you know, I'm standing like I am with Manny, and she's tiny. And I said, Mother Teresa, can you tell me what it's like to be called a living saint? And she had these beautiful, opaque looking blue eyes that you felt like she was looking into your soul. And she took my hand in hers and she said, Rita, you're a saint, I'm a saint. Anybody who does God's work is a saint. Now, I've not been called Saint Rita very much after that. But truly, every day of my life, I remember her and how she touched my life. And if I were able, I didn't use that bite on the air, but it's ingrained in me as if I had. But there's so many memories and things that we changed from, you know, foster children being killed and suing the foster system in California, where now if a child dies, you have to have access to those records. Just so many things that we've all done here, and you have all done, that you can be proud of in your life, that stays with you well past that last paycheck. So.
I was in radio, the morning mayor. Morning radio. Now, apparently, I'm Saint Don, and we're going to open this up to all of you saints out here for questions. Our time is getting there, but if you have a question, we'd be more than happy to. Yes, sir. We have a mic, and Matt has the mic. Hang on.
I notice there's a lot of real pretty young girls out there that are that are news people. Are they real journalists? Are they paid by the hour? I don't understand what's going on, because they're all pretty and they're all young girls. I don't see any guys out there.
I can tell you that the ones I work with, they're very much journalists. They came up through the ranks, and they may have come up rather quickly, but you know, they're veteran reporters, and I think they know exactly what they're doing. I'll give you an example of one person who I always use as a great example, who is older than just a young girl, but Leslie Griffith, very beautiful woman, right? She's been in every lousy neighborhood, every dangerous situation, every threatening kind of thing you could possibly be in, and she did that every night for the 10 o'clock news until she became an anchor. I have a lot of respect for these folks because, and even more respect for the photographers, because they go into some pretty horrendous places very often by themselves, and we've been getting robbed lately because of that. But the reality of the situation is the ones that we have to a person at Channel 2, I think, are deserving of being there, and I have nothing but respect for them.
But if I can follow up on that one with, you remember the story I told you at the beginning about women not aging on the air, and I think Belva will agree with me, that you still may see an older man coupled with a very young woman, and it still has not changed that much. You don't see women who are not very attractive. And so I think that there's still an issue with that. As far as these women, as Tom said, they've worked their way up, they deserve to be there. And you do see some pretty men now, I gotta tell you. It's almost like TV news now is more of an entertainment business, and you don't see a lot of ugly folks. I remember one person, no really, think about it, there was a consultant from New York who came and talked to me in the early 70s and said, you know, Rita, you're just right for TV. You're not gorgeous, so that people are just going to be fixated on your looks, but you're not ugly, so they're not going to think about how ugly you are. You're attractive. And so that, I mean, really, think about it. And you know, we told back then, I'm sure Belva, because she was before me, but when I started, I was the first woman at the station in San Antonio. What do you wear? So I looked at the guys and they all wore dark suits. So I started wearing dark suits with light colored pretty blouses underneath them. And when I did that until the day I retired. Now you see people with tight dresses and sleeveless, and you see some of the guys out in the field with their shirts rolled up to see their muscles. I mean, especially in LA, you see it more.
We don't have muscles in Northern California,
But I think
except in months of Indian arm.
there you go. It's too cold up here. But anyway, things have changed. But as Tom said, some of the folks who are coming in now in this market maybe have come up faster than we did. Like when I moved here, I already had something like 15 years or something, and I was the youngest or the junior at the station, with people like Vern Hawkins, the late Vern Hawkins, and his significant other, Catherine Toronto, is here, who embraced me and were so wonderful. But there were elders like Vern and Betty Ann Bruno, and I'm forgetting some of the other names, Dennis, of course. But, you know, you really had to have worked your way up to get to the San Francisco market. Now it's much easier. And maybe because of what Manny said, a lot of people aren't choosing to do it. So,
Yeah, totally. This is 2 questions back. You ask about stories that impacted your life.
Yeah.
Well, I think because today I picked up the paper and there was still another story on this topic. I once did a series called Stopped for Questioning, and it was questioning the practice of the Oakland Police Department. And it was a hard-hitting story. Our cameramen hated me for it because they lost their privileges with some of the police officers who used to cooperate with them. And so we went through that. They even sent a brigade of officers from Oakland to Tommy's Joint, where our guys hung out, to sort of tell them, you know, lay off. But that wasn't the only thing. On the day this dear series was to air, the chief of police came to Channel 4 to see the manager and told him we should not air this. And I didn't know what was going to happen, neither did my producer, but we would call to the manager's office, and we sat there and we discussed it, and I can't even remember the great person's name, but he listened diligently. You've done what you have to do as a citizen, and I will do what I have to do. We are running that series tonight. But that wasn't all. Then the next day, my son was arrested for making an illegal right-hand turn. So we had to go to the jail and get him out. So this story really had an impact on my life, and I just wanted to share it because I just noticed new statistics on Oakland's police stopped for questioning the same theories. It must have been 20 years ago when I did that.
Next question. Well, some of the headlines never change, do they?
I've got one. As Manny, you were talking about, you know, the future of television and local television, and the way I feel I'm the luckiest human being on earth to have sold when I sold. But today, it seems to me that local television's strength is news. And it seems because when you look at Comcast owning NBC and Universal and MCA, etc., now AT&T taking over Time Warner, all local television has is localism, and localism is news.
Except, Jim, what's happening is that so many of these big companies are taking over a television station in one town, eliminating that staff of that one town, and doing the news from another town. They're not doing local news. They're doing general news of a region. I was talking to somebody the other day. I think at one time the San Jose Mercury had 430-something reporters. Now it has 52. It's just gone. And those people are gone. You know, I think you can get your news in a number of different ways. I just don't see it. It's not a good trend. I mean, they're eliminating news staffs all over the country and just doing news out of one central location. They started with weather, and then they went to sports, for where sports is being done, and then now they're doing news. They're just like doing it out of one area. That's what bothers me the most. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but it doesn't look good.
On that note, a little pessimistic here, who knows what the future will be? Unfortunately, we have to clear out this room because they're doing a broadcast in here. They're bringing in a bowling alley. Be careful, get those tables out of the way. Okay? Tommy, I wish we had more time. I know everybody's fascinated by this, but I need a nap. Tom, thank you very much. Rita, Manny, Belva, thank you so much for being here. Thank
I want to thank everybody. The newscasters, our panel, Bob Melrose, John James, everybody. Bob Brown, Dan Odo, Belva, Manny, Rita, Tom. Circle Saturday, October 13th is Bar Hop and the legendary station of the year right here at the Valley. Drop your name badges in the box in the lobby and drive carefully going home. Remember, we don't worry about you, it's the guy in the other car. And somebody's pair of glasses. Don, that's it. Donnie, Don, yo.